All right, well, thank you for coming out on a Monday evening. It's my great pleasure to be here at Penn. Penn is, of course, famous around the world for its archaeology, but Cyprus archaeologists owe a special debt of gratitude to Penn for their work at Kurian and also at Kyrenia shipwreck. Two very famous, very important archaeological sites. And in fact, I'll show you a slide in a few moments with the Cyprus contribution to the euro coin for my own purposes, but I'll also point out that one of the gold 10, 50, 20 cent pieces has the Kyrenia ship on it as well. So two of the coins are archaeologically related, and one of them relates to work that Penn has done. Now, I'll admit a little bit that the operative word in this title is ancestors rather than Aphrodite. I'm not going to talk very much about Aphrodite because what I'll be pointing out here in the lecture is that we know a fair bit about the expressions of the later cult of Aphrodite in Cyprus. And we know that there were some prehistoric precursors to that. But we know very little about, there's a break in time, and I'll point that out. So the excavations, the Prastio Mesorotsos archaeological expedition, is something that I hope you'll agree with me elucidates some of the gaps in our knowledge. Cyprus has long been understood to be the birthplace of Aphrodite, and the location of her most important religious center was in Paphos, western Cyprus. The actual location where she was born, of Seafoam, is reported to be just a short distance from Paphos at a place called Petra to Romiou, or Aphrodite's Rock. But before the Renaissance image of Botticelli's Venus, and even the ancient Roman Venus and Iron Age Aphrodites, however, is her late Bronze Age precursor, seen here in all of her aniconic beauty. I think, personally, it looks a bit like a giant nose. But I'm not going to talk too much about this expression of the Bronze Age aniconic idol, as it's said to be from Paphos, but this is where it was located here. Around 13 to 1200 BC, a temple or sanctuary was built on a monumental scale. And you can see the Cyclopean walls here and the Roman coins here. These Roman coins show, you can see within the temple facade they have the aniconic representation of the deity there, and reported to have been not an anthropomorphic figure of Aphrodite, but just a stone, a betel stone, in fact. And we know of these betel stones from Iron Age and from Bronze and Iron Age Cyprus from elsewhere too. This was accompanied by the building of this Bronze Age sanctuary was accompanied by the establishment of one of the earliest urban centers on the island, Paphos. That is to say, Old Paphos, which is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Unfortunately, our knowledge of how and why this important sanctuary was built and who the inhabitants of this urban agglomeration were is poorly understood. The city of Paphos sits beneath the modern village of Kuklia, which Google Maps says this a little bit wrong. This is the village of Kuklia, and this blank spot right here next to the S, that's where the UNESCO Archaeological Park and the sanctuary is located. As such, it is largely unavailable for excavation. But as I shall discuss, the nature of the evidence is such that it will always be difficult to draw conclusions about what happened in the early part of the late Bronze Age at this site. The reasons for this are manifold, But in short, there are two important factors that cloud the issue of the foundation of the city and its temple, later known to be associated with Aphrodite. First, much of Bronze Age Paphos, including the sanctuary, was either built on virgin ground, and you can see again here, the Cyclopean walls are sitting directly on bedrock in many places. It was either built on virgin ground, or this and subsequent constructions obliterated traces of any earlier occupation. Second, Old Paphos likely does not conform to our preconceived ideas of what an urban center is, making it difficult without impossibly extensive excavations to gauge what, where, and when the city was. I'll return to this point later on in the talk. In recent years, Professor Maria Iacovu from the University of Cyprus has been working diligently to save and research the antiquities in the vicinity of Kuklia. But her results, while extremely important, have been and will remain piecemeal and partial. And the chronological evidence from before the Late Bronze Age will probably never be very satisfying. In any case, we can be fairly certain that the Late Bronze Age sanctuary, with its association to a possible female deity, carried on its sacred function beyond the Late Bronze Age into the Iron Age, Hellenistic, and Roman periods, becoming one of the most important places for worship of the goddess we know as Aphrodite. Because the city of Paphos has such an unclear foundation, however, what we do not know is who or what were Aphrodite's ancestors. This does not mean that attempts to tie the foundation of the city and its late Cypriot Bronze Age sanctuary, and as a consequence Aphrodite, to earlier prehistory have not been made. On the contrary, the area around Kuklia is almost certain to have been of special importance in the Middle Chalcolithic period, dating to the end of the 3rd millennium BC, as seen in the cemeteries and settlement of Suskiu Launa and Vathirkakis, only a kilometer away. In this little deeply incised valley there is the Suskiu sites. This is a place where by far and away the largest amount of picrolite pendants and figurines have been found on the island. While it is almost certainly wrong to associate the grave goods found here with a goddess, the fact that some of these figurines and pendants show female characteristics and possibly birthing posture has led some to speculate that the sacred area related to a goddess in the Late Bronze Age finds its roots in the Middle Chalcolithic period. Picrolite, in particular, is abundant at Suskiu, and note the coin there, that's the Cyprus edition of the euro. This is the Yalia figurine, not from Suskiu, or that we know of. But you can see that very interestingly, the pendant is wearing a figurine of itself there. These are from Suskiu. You can see some female characteristics on some of them, but not all of them. So we can't say for certain that all of these are female. We can't say for certain that they're all birthing postures. Certainly, I think that there are a lot of them that have both male and female characteristics. Picrolite in particular is abundant at Suskiu in spite of the fact that it does not occur locally in the immediate region, and it would have needed to have been brought in from the high mountains or from the Kouris River drainage area to the east. The first problem with drawing a direct line from prehistory into Late Bronze Age proto-history, an issue that I will discuss further along, is that while Suskiu is definitely a special place in the Chalcolithic period, it is also both a village and a location of cemeteries. These are most certainly real dead people, not gods and goddesses, and there is no reason to think that they were conceived of as anything apart from ancestors, and the rituals can only be thought of as veneration. Prior to the Bronze Age, the typical practice of burying the dead in Cyprus was interment within villages, either beside or underneath houses. That's not what you're looking at here. People wanted to be close to their ancestors. The exception, which you are looking at here, is Suskiu, where some individuals, probably from a wide region rather than just one village, were buried under special circumstances in bottle-shaped tombs, the apertures of which you see on this rocky outcrop here. The results of nearly a decade of excavation are still in progress, but essentially we have identified a complex series of ritual activities at Suskiu, which represents a special set of behaviors unique to this place, indicating a regional or perhaps even island-wide identification of a sacred landscape here. And you can see that these are the bottle-shaped tombs here, and we have both articulated and commingled remains with artifacts left as grave goods, some of which you've seen already. As tempting as it may be, the main problem with drawing a direct line between Suskiu and Paphos is a pesky 1600-year intermediate period called the Late Chalcolithic period, the Philia period, the Early Cypriot 1, 2, and 3, and the Middle Bronze Age 1, 2, and 3. Before one gets to the beginning of the Late Bronze Age. And the sanctuary was almost certain to have been founded no earlier than the Late Cypriot II period, probably even later. Again, while it is tempting to think that there was a social memory of a sacred space or landscape, because of the fact that Suskiu and Paphos are not stratigraphically linked, it is impossible to demonstrate any link at all. And in fact, to err on the side of caution, one must assume that with all of the social changes that took place in 1600 years of the intervening Late Chalcolithic and early Middle Cypriot periods, there was no continuity or memory. So we have a problem. There is no direct link between the Chalcolithic ritual center of Suskiu and the Late Bronze Age ritual center of Paphos. And there is no site previously excavated that has a continuous sequence spanning these periods, which could help us to understand the transition from prehistory into proto-history. While there is a tempting coincidence of special sacred places in close geographical proximity to one another, there is no way we can draw a direct line between the two. So we need to look at the sites that have a long history, and we need to look around beyond the sites that Paphos and Suskiu to see if we can find a connection between the periods. Now, the site I'll be talking about, Prastio Mesorotsos, has these characteristics. While there is no unbroken sequence at either Suskiu or Paphos, there is a site in the immediate hinterland located about 15 kilometers up the Diarissos Valley, of which Suskiu and Kuklia lie at the mouth, that could prove to have nearly 10,000 years of almost unbroken occupation. Quickly, let me go back here. Quickly, because I'm going to try and keep up with these slides. I'm going to name the pottery as they come up. It's a quiz for myself. This is Neolithic, Early Chalcolithic. This is Late Chalcolithic or Early Bronze Age, Early Cypriot 1, 2, Early Cypriot 3, Middle Cypriot, Late Middle Cypriot, Geometric, Archaic, Hellenistic, Roman, Late Roman, Byzantine, we have some better ones, and medieval, and of course I'm not showing the Ottoman and British Mandate periods as well. So we've got a lot of different periods. And this also doesn't show our pre-pottery phases. This is just ceramics. I say almost unbroken occupation because, importantly, the site of Prastio Mesorotsos appears to have a hiatus of occupation at the end of the Middle Cypriot period, or rather the MC3, LC1, depending on what how you want to name it. So this is identified by this nice big red spot here. You can ignore Philia because I think that that's a chronological mirage. I think that Philia just didn't occur here, and we go directly from Late Chalcolithic into EC1. I can discuss that at length in another presentation. The site of Prastio Mesorotsos was a substantial and attractive rural village that had all of the advantages of being in close proximity to a perennial water source, located at the cusp of the mountainous Troodos Massif, close to arable and pastoral land, and occupying a secure and easily defensible position. The site itself is located in the Diarissos River Valley in the west of Cyprus, approximately 15 kilometers from the sea, and in the hinterland of Kuklia and the site of Paphos, which we'll talk about later. The site was first surveyed by our team in 2008, at which time we determined the site's full extent of 10 hectares at its largest, and it spanned an unprecedented length of time. For those of you who are familiar with archaeology in mainland Near East, tell sites, these sort of deep and deeply stratified long occupations are not as uncommon, but in Cyprus these just simply don't exist that we know of until this site. In all, we can show evidence of occupation probably beginning in the Cypriot pre-Potter Neolithic B period, continuing into the Heraclitean Aceramic Neolithic period, the early, middle, and late Chalcolithic periods, the early and middle Bronze Ages. There is a clear gap of about 500 to 600 years when there is no occupation during the late Bronze Age, and then the site is re-inhabited in the Cyprogeometric period and continues to be occupied in the Archaic, Cyproclassical, Hellenistic, Roman, Late Roman, Byzantine, including Dark Ages, Frankish, Venetian, Ottoman, and British periods. When in the British period, this was actually the site of a hideout of a bandit gang called the Hassan Pulia, who were kind of, I guess, the best approximation of the Cypriot Zorros or Cypriot Robin Hood. So it even has a very interesting modern association as well. It was finally abandoned in 1953 after an earthquake destroyed the village. The site will have always been a village, surrounding a prominent rocky outcrop that holds a dramatic location right in the river valley. There was some drift of occupation from period to period around the total extent of 10 hectares, reaching its largest sizes in the Chalcolithic, Bronze Age, and late Roman to medieval periods. It is likely that the site was chosen as a suitable place to live because it has abundant natural resources. It is a link between the east and the west, and between the mountains and the sea. From period to period, it just seemed to be a great place for people to live, and even today it is a great place to work. The 2008 survey showed that there was a likelihood of finding in situ deposits in stratified sequence from a number of periods. This map here shows the surface collection of chipstone tools indicating the spread of likely inhabitation. Another map shows the density of Chalcolithic pottery finds, and in the same spots you can see the density of Bronze Age pottery finds. So these are all in the same locations. We figured if there was ever a chance to find stratigraphy between the Chalcolithic to the Bronze Age, we would find it here. These two contiguous periods are found in roughly the same places as one another. So to date, no site in Cyprus has ever revealed a continuous sequence between these periods. But we have roughly the same kind of superpositioning for most of the transitions that we find at this site. I will briefly describe our long sequence by looking at some of our trenches. Let's start with the Neolithic. Area 5-6 shows our earliest occupation in the PPNB period, when the location was probably a seasonal camp for a community that used the spot for hunting raids in the mountain forests. Through time, they repeatedly visited the spot, eventually becoming invested in the location and settling here year-round. By the Heraclitean period, they were permanent residents, and there seems to be a continuity from the Aceramic period and the late Neolithic, where we see the introduction of pottery. The late Neolithic blends right into the early Chalcolithic, in fact using the foundations of one house to build the other. The middle Chalcolithic then continues, and we have traces of the interface between the late Chalcolithic into the Bronze Age. This shows some of the sequence from area 5 and 6 and the depth of deposits we're talking about here. We're exposing this in a step trench method. So we have our earliest deposits down here, and it rises up the hill, and we step up at various intervals on each of these terraces to expose all of these simultaneously. The earliest occupation is represented by residual epipaleolithic technology, represented by these lunate microlith tools, ornaments contemporary with Calabasas Tenta II period, and an incised pebble reminiscent of the ones found at other PPNB sites in Cyprus and on the mainland, Levant. we can see that there is a series of superimposed occupational levels, including houses, surfaces, and installations. Remarkable about this particular thing is this tannour that you see here, and this was a deposit interior to a pit house that built up around the tannour, such that although it originally had a side entry to the oven, eventually the deposits inside the house had built up so much that they started using it as a top entry. So this would have been a floor surface, and they would have had a pit there. So this is really remarkable and unprecedented continuity between various phases. So this continued from into the Hierakontian phase, and fortunately we don't just have to go by anonymous traces of rubbish. We also have some redeposited burial with several fragments of human remains dating to the Hierakontian aceramic Neolithic period, which gives us direct information about a person who lived here. Hopefully we'll be able to do more with this, and if we get more burials, we can actually do some of the studies of who the people were and whether they were the same ones that were sticking around the site or different. If we can link the PPNB through the Hierakontian, we might also be able to show development from the aceramic period into the era of ceramics. So this is Hierakontian, the end of the aceramic period, and we have a direct link into our late Neolithic and early Chalcolithic periods. The location of that pot spread, which you can see the pottery in situ here in a cooking installation area, which was within a house structure. There's one of the downslope walls there, and this is the second phase of mortar installation for a food preparation area. So what you just saw that's another one. That's on top of what you see here, in the same spot. That would have been right around this spot, but on top of it. So we have, within the same elliptical structure, which you see in the bottom, we have three different Neolithic into early Chalcolithic installations in the exact same spot. This is the original Neolithic platform. This was placed on top of it, and that was placed on top of it. So real continuity. Certainly continuity in a belief and value system was maintained as well, as attested by the long-lived usage of the particular blue-green stone native to Cyprus called picrolite. The inhabitants used this stone for ornaments and special objects from the earliest periods, as you see with this perforated pendant from the Neolithic period, and all the way down into the Middle Bronze Age that you see here. And this is a typical Middle Bronze Age or Bronze Age design. Some are too faint, but these ones you can see it's a dotted circle, and there's several of them that go around in bands. Now this is from the Middle Bronze Age, which is later than you find at many other sites from this period. So they're using picrolite for long periods of time. We continue to see inhabitation at the site through the Chalcolithic period, particularly in a series of pit structures. This is from Area 7. And not the most exciting archaeology, but our archaeobotanist loves these pits because there's lots of seeds for her to look at. And we have a pit here cutting another pit, and those two are also cutting this third pit here. So pits, cutting pits, cutting pits. It makes for good science, maybe not good storytelling though. After this period, significant changes occur. At other sites, we know that the late Chalcolithic period has simpler pottery, and there is evidence from other sites of increasing social stratification, a move from relatively egalitarian society to a probably male-dominated, structured society with differential access to resources. In other words, leaders emerge in communities and begin to establish formal controls over economy and society. We are only beginning to get traces of this period in Prastio Mesorotsos, so I don't have very much to show you. But we have clear material culture dating to this period on the site, including red and black stroke burnished pottery, as well as some weird transitional ceramics, like you see here, that look both Chalcolithic and Bronze Age at the same time. But there are no clear Filiot period ceramics, which is thought to be typical of the transition. So we have our own little thing going on here. In Area 4, our sequence picks up again in a remarkable trench dating from the transition from the late Chalcolithic to the early Bronze Age. Again, a transition never before seen in Cyprus. Always before, in every other case, a site was either Bronze Age or Chalcolithic, never both. In this trench, we see a very strange transition, which does not seem to fit with other sites in Cyprus, according to the evidence archaeologists have determined previously. The standard view is that the early Bronze Age is when a completely new way of life began. People stopped living in round houses and switched to square houses. They began herding cattle instead of mainly sheep and goat. They buried their dead in cemeteries instead of burying them in villages. And there are many influences from outside of the island, prompting some to see the transition as a replacement of local culture with an intrusive one. The sequence that you see here is all Bronze Age, starting down here. But you can see that this is all early Cypriot, and I'll come to this in a moment. You'll see that I just described the Bronze Age as being rectilinear, square architecture. Well, that's not a square building there. And Middle Cypriot Bronze Age, and then later the end of the Middle Cypriot Bronze Age. At Prastio Mesorotsos, this same transition does occur between curvilinear to rectilinear architecture, things like that, but several hundred years later than one would expect during the transition from the early Bronze Age to the Middle Bronze Age, rather than Chalcolithic to early Bronze. I will come to this in a moment, but contrary to expectations, our earliest Bronze Age deposits show remarkable conservatism and continuity from previous periods. They continued to live in round structures, bury some of their dead in houses. There are no cattle bones, and the behaviors in general seem to be a throwback or continuity from the early Chalcolithic culture. In other words, these seem to be the same people as before, but simply slowly changing and adapting to a new set of influences. The ceramic change is in line with what one would expect, although in light of these other continuities, the ceramics look much more like adaptations of earlier ceramics. There is the introduction of the cutaway spout jug at this time, this one in situ here on an early Bronze Age floor, crushed in antiquity. There is the introduction of the cutaway spout jug, which has clear affinities to mainland Turkey, but the blacktop bowls seem to carry on from the Chalcolithic right through the early and Middle Bronze Age periods. And here's a close-up of one of our EC12 bowl handles. And these continue right into the EC3 and into the Middle Cypriot period as well, these blacktop bowls. Change in style. But the residents are building round houses, crafting stone bowls more similar to Chalcolithic ones. You can see the stone bowl right there. And burying at least some of their dead in the houses, just as the Chalcolithic people were known to do. And actually they're working on the burial right now in this photo. I include it. These two round houses, you kind of have to squint your eyes to see them, but I'll just point out that this is a curvilinear wall coming around this way, and this has been robbed out, but this is a curving structure right next to it as well. And this deposit right here is a burial just inside the interior space of the wall on the terminal floor. It was an infant burial that was found in a shallow pit on the terminal surface of this building on the left. In other words, it was left there just as the building was abandoned and then rebuilt upon. This is a close-up shot of it. You can see the tiny little bones. This is running out of batteries. Oh, there we go. Here we go. The bones. They're very difficult to excavate, but they're extremely important. There were some objects found near the body, including a bone pin fragment and a picrolite, flake of picrolite, possibly, but it was also found in an apparent rubbish deposit, or alternatively a special ritual deposit. We don't really know which. It's hard to tell which it is, but it could relate to the fact that this deceased baby was not yet fully acknowledged as a person in this society and thus could be discarded, or possibly it was so important that it prompted the closure of the structure and the burial with ritual significance. We hope to have more answers in the future. These remains are being studied by Polixenia Kyriakou, a specialist who works with our project, and she has identified these remains. These are just some details about the burial. Clavicle here, an ulna, lumbar vertebrae, and some more information and next steps for this. We hope that the scientific analyses can tell us more about the age of the baby when it died, the health and possible cause of death, the origin of the baby and its mother, and other types of information. This stratigraphic sequence continues into later phases of the early Bronze Age where more roundhouses are found. So it's not just this one stratum of two side-by-side houses, which you can see one of the walls here, and this is the interior deposits in this structure. But in addition, there's the stone bowl. We have multiple strata of these. Nowhere is the transition between the early and the Middle Bronze Age clearer than in the location where a Middle Bronze Age rectilinear wall cuts through a curvilinear early Bronze Age wall. The construction type is different, the terracing is different, the organization of the community is different. The pottery is different and shows a greater affinity to west coasts in Cyprus in the Middle Bronze Age. And they began burying their dead in a cemetery on the opposite bank of the river, all contemporary with this rectilinear structure here. This is the earlier Chalcolithic curvilinear structure. Also, we can see a social development that is set in motion by which greater sophistication and hierarchy is evident as time goes on. This can be seen in the terraces built behind wall 400 that you can see here. An upper terrace upon which series of buildings and living spaces were built. That's the upper terrace. And this is the surfaces that you can see. Constrained by large terraces and massive monumental walls, such as the one seen in the back there, which is as 1.5 meters wide. So going up to this is our latest phase. And you can see this is the overhead shot of that wall with the 1.5 meter wall number 451. On the surfaces of these later phases, Middle Cypriot phases, were found domestic paraphernalia showing widespread links across the island. This is South Coast style. This is a true black polished from the North Coast. This is drab polished blue core, which is from the West Coast. This is a local type of spindle whorl, and I'll just point out these are groundstone tools left in situ on the surface face down, so just left behind. All of these things were left behind. And another spindle whorl here. These are all very different to the local flavor of the early Bronze Age. It's much more connected. Groundstone tools and spindle whorls show increasing intensity of production. At one point in this later build of Wall 451, there was a half-spiral staircase or ramp, probably a ramp, I'd say, connecting one side of the terrace wall to the other. Perhaps to prevent excess drainage, this was blocked off and the wall increased in stature to increase breadth and length. This is the blockage of that ramp as you go up in between those there. And I think the ramp is built of this sort of cobble material, so it would have gone up in that direction to an upper terrace level. The large wall 451 shows the pinnacle of sophistication at the end of the Middle Bronze Age, around 1600 BC. Oddly, the inhabitants of Prastio Mesorotsos, flush with new sophistication, organization, and a vibrant economy, chose to abandon the site abruptly for the first time in around 6,000 years. So we have no other abandonments until this time, and it just seems at the time when they are doing everything right. The sequence is clear, if enigmatic. Continuity and an unbroken sequence of increasing sophistication is evident. So you have your late Chalcolithic, early Cypriot. Down here, you have some early Cypriot Bronze Age, earlier Middle Cypriot Bronze Age, and later Middle Cypriot Bronze Age. And nothing beyond that. You can also see how the slope of the hill is truncating all of these deposits as we go along. But it allows us to expose all of this, so we have to work with the hill. We know that this location was not occupied any later than the Middle Cypriot period, as these are the latest remains that occur in this spot. We know that the site was not occupied during the subsequent late Cypriot period because, as I said, not a single artifact assured anything dating to the late Bronze Age has been found from anywhere at the site. This is borne out in the survey data as well. Furthermore, there is very clear evidence of the reoccupation of the site after the late Cypriot period in the geometric and Cypriot periods, the Hellenistic period, Roman, Byzantine, medieval, and post-medieval periods. So they came back, or someone came back. It's still an attractive site. So why was the site abandoned? Where did they go? Why did they move? I suspect that they moved to the coast to become part of the burgeoning community at Paphos. Interestingly, however, what is clear from Prastio Mesorotsos is that while the inhabitants left and abandoned the site, they did so at the end of the Middle Cypriot period, before Paphos had reached urban proportions, and hundreds of years before the foundation of the sanctuary. If we believe that the inhabitants went to the coast to reside in Paphos, and they and their counterparts in other abandoned rural villages, as you see in the survey data, these inhabitants of the rural villages were the true ancestors of Aphrodite. Early and Middle Bronze Age ritual activity, as in the preceding Chalcolithic period, mainly had to do with the cult of the ancestors and centered on funerary customs and domestic ritual. In the Bronze Age, elaboration of these behaviors can be seen in grave goods that may have involved the consumption of intoxicants by the living participants. This was probably beer in the early Cypriot 1 and 2 periods. There seems to have been an almost limitless range of vessel types as well, attesting to the very individual and personal nature of this behavior. By the EC3 period, it is likely that they were drinking wine for these rituals as well, but the forms continue to be highly individualized rather than one-size-fits-all standardized burial rituals. By the Middle Cypriot period, it is possible that forms of the drab-polished blue coreware, typical of Western Cyprus, served both domestic and ritual functions too. If drab-polished blue coreware is indeed the precursor to the puppy-shaped base ring vessels, this would place Western Cyprus in a precocious position in terms of the late Bronze Age preeminence of Cyprus in Mediterranean trade. Still, in the early and Middle Cypriot periods, ritual and religiosity did not take place in a temple, but in a grave. There do not appear to have been abstract deities, but rather transformed humans who break through the liminality of death to fulfill the role of ancestor. The tomb, therefore, was the closest we have to a temple in the early and Middle Bronze Ages. And this is likely to be the same case for the Chalcolithic period, as you saw at Suskew. And the objects associated with burials can be thought of in terms of this system of belief. So these are ancestor-related. The one on the right is a plank figurine dating to the Bronze Age, in the early Bronze Age. In addition to the settlement of Mesorotsos and the limited number of intramural burials found at the site, we think that we have identified the cemetery across the river on the opposite bank, basically where I'm standing taking this photograph. Geophysics, you can see this is the site up here, and over on the opposite bank is where we did some geophysics and surface collection. And you can see, well, maybe you can't see, the point is that this geophysics resistivity analysis, all these black dots here are actually their errors. So this should be a pretty blank map. In other words, there's no architecture on that side of the river, but we're finding Middle Cypriot pottery. So we suspect that the absence of architecture with Middle Cypriot pottery leads me to believe that this is probably the likely location of the cemetery. The only ceramics found in the, interestingly, while the ceramics for the intramural infant burial in the roundhouse date to the early Cypriot period, the ceramics for the rectilinear structures are drab polished blue core, as you see here. The only ceramics found in the proposed location of the cemetery are also drab polished blue core, which likely indicates a Middle Cypriot date for the cemetery, contemporary with the rectilinear structures. So, why then would a small-scale community such as Prastio be abandoned? What happened on Cyprus that caused such an upheaval? Most sites don't have very good for this transition, and at Prastio the evidence is simply not there because we do not have late Cypriot occupation. Thus we must look to the establishment of the first urban center in western Cyprus and the establishment of the sanctuary of Paleipaphos, modern Kuklia, on the coast. Archaeologists like Maria Iacovu are piecing together the development of the early phases of Paleipaphos, but the spread out nature of the settlement, the fact that a modern village lies on top of it, and the fact that it is a World Heritage Site do not aid our understanding. The sanctuary of Aphrodite was built no earlier than the late Cypriot II period, made using Cyclopean masonry, and was of formidable size. Accompanying this temple were signs of standardized and highly controlled forms of economy and behaviors, including the use of cylinder seals, representations of deities in the form of aniconic symbols, and new ritual paraphernalia such as horns of consecration and ritual baths, imported features more common in the Aegean and the mainland Near East. These standardized and controlled practices coincide with what is widely believed to be the establishment of the first city in western Cyprus, and one of the first on the island as a whole. While later Iron Age and Hellenistic cities certainly obscured or obliterated parts of the late Bronze Age occupation, I feel that it is more likely scenario that rather than thinking of late Cypriot Paphos as a centralized city with a compact, walled urban layout, we should be thinking of the immediate area around Paphos as a collection of villages. If we widen our view to take in the larger area than the Iron Age city, and the next view is going to be just above the top of this map here, the idea of a collection of villages or clustered neighborhoods becomes even clearer. This can be seen just under 5 kilometers to the north, near where the Chalcolithic settlement and cemeteries of Souskiou were located, as a series of late Cypriot settlements and cemeteries dot the landscape. Perhaps one of these small clustered communities contained the transplanted inhabitants of Prastio after the abandonment. From the series of surveys conducted in the Diarissos Valley and western Cyprus in general, it appears as though a deruralization in this area was complete, and this is borne out in the population agglomeration of whatever form at Paleipaphos. The changes were profound. The main religious focus became centered around a true deity rather than only idiomatic veneration of ancestors, although similar practices of burial did carry on into the late Bronze Age and Iron Ages. The rural way of life was abandoned for a period of time. Life in the Troodos foothills was rejected in favor of a coastal, outward-looking, island way of life. The draw must have been tremendous, but what form did the draw take? Were the country dwellers lured and enticed by coastal economic activity, or did the rural economy collapse and force them to consolidate? We don't know for sure, but it is impossible that the inhabitants of the hinterland were coerced or forced to move to a central location at the command of a new powerful elite because they did not exist yet. Likewise, the lure of the goddess could not compel the residents of Prastio to follow her because she had not been invented yet. There is a gap of at least 200 years before we can even talk about the foundation of the sanctuary. What prompted the inhabitants of Prastio to abandon their long-lived settlement? Whatever the scenario, it is possible that the abandonment will tell us something about how and why the hinterland was abandoned, and provide us with much-needed information about what came before the establishment of Paleipaphos and its own form of urban community. At present, it seems likely that the draw of Paphos was enticement, and the excavations in Area 4 show that the inhabitants were already developing sophisticated social structures, complex architectural syntax, and probably expanding beyond the limits of what their rural community could withstand. What does seem clear, however, is that while an abrupt change, for whatever reason, is likely to have occurred at the end of the Middle Cypriot period, and the rural inhabitants of Paphos hinterland were probably the future inhabitants of Paphos itself in late Cypriot urbanization period. This demonstrates an indigenous development from local rural inhabitants, coupled later on with an acculturated foreign understanding of worship. The product, of course, would be a deity eventually equated with the Paphian Aphrodite. We don't know what she was called in the Bronze Age. In any case, after the end of the tumultuous late Bronze Age, Paphos carried on with its own history of urbanization, but the demographic draw from the rural areas ceased to be so strong, and the hinterland was again reoccupied. Prastio was reoccupied, highlighting its appeal for the ancient inhabitants that had lived there for thousands of years. After this hiatus blip, in the late Bronze Age, people returned to the site in the first millennium, possibly as early as 800 BC, and carries on for all the periods that I've previously described. I don't have enough time here to carry on with these later periods of the site, but I will point out that, as you might guess, I require a great deal of help and support from colleagues in order to understand a site that has almost 10,000 years of occupation, of unbroken history. I am currently the director of the Cyprus American Archaeological Research Institute, CAARI. This institute is perfect for accessing a network of scholars who can help me to deal with a multi-period site. I haven't even started to talk about the Byzantine period yet. Through CAARI, I have been able to collaborate with scholars from all over the world to assist in the analysis and interpretation of the remains from Prastio Mesorotsos. CAARI has a permanent presence in Cyprus at our institute, which holds an impressive library, which has recently been renovated and is currently in plans to be expanded. We have renovated laboratories and updated residence, great study collections, and it acts as a clearinghouse of information on current and past archaeological practice. As the only foreign archaeological institute in Cyprus, we are truly international, bringing together scholars from around the world. We are a charity both in America and Cyprus, and we rely heavily on support from donors. At the same time, we are affiliated with the Council for American Overseas Research Centers and with the American Schools of Oriental Research, and we have good relationships with our sister institutions. We offer a range of fellowships, and I encourage any of you who might be interested in this to apply for them and also to support them through donations. And finally, I would not be able to do justice to a site as rich as Prastio without the help from the great team that has worked with me and posed for my photos in the hot sun, as well as through the contacts available to me at CAARI. I thank you all for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you in Cyprus at some point.